She was labeled 0 reproductive value and everyone laughed until a human got her pregnant. The mud hit her face with a wet smack and for a second, just a second, it looked like the soil responded. A thread-thin root, purple and translucent, squirmed from the cracked ground where it landed. No one else noticed, but he did. Marin stood at the edge of the square, sun behind him, dust curling at his boots. No greetings, no handshakes, just stares. Measured, amused, dismissive. His arrival was not a surprise. They'd been warned. They always warned about men like him, exiles with degrees and defiance. A woman scoffed as she passed another central. Scrap, he'll be gone before frost. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His punishment was stamped on his back in the form of this remote assignment. No appeal, no trial, just a slow, quiet eraser. 1 minute he was Dr. William Willie Marin, lead xenobotanist at ARC Station 12. The next he was a man stripped of rank for refusing to weaponize root sleep toxins on sentient crop species. Not enough to jail, too much to forgive. So they buried him in a village at the edge of cultivated space where things didn't grow right and people didn't look you in the eye unless they were laughing around him. The colony groaned, rusted. Aqueduct leaked pale blue water into thirsty soil that refused to hold it. The plum-colored crops, their stalks tall, waxy and almost fleshy, twitched faintly in the wind as if listening, as if waiting. Their root systems, he'd been told, grew horizontally and shallow, a weakness the elders blamed on bad seed and useless hands. Most of the blame fell on her, the girl they called Dry. She knelt beside the far greenhouse alone, hands deep in the dirt. Her skin shimmered a muted green, sun-dappled, and her hair fell in a long red curtain over one shoulder, not styled, just pulled back out of the way. She wore the same rough stitched tunic as everyone else, but hers was stained with soil and time. Another villager tossed a pebble near her, fertilized that dry girl. No reaction. She stayed bent, working as if she didn't hear, or worse, expected it. Marin took a slow breath, the old instinct step and speak up lit in his gut, but his hands stayed at his sides. Not yet. The greenhouse they gave him sat near the edge of the crop line, framed by two half-dead irrigation towers and a collapsed compost bin. Its roof was mottled with rust, glass panes cracked and patched with wax. Tarp vines crept up one wall, colorless and limp. It smelled like fungal rot and disappointment. He pushed open the warped door. A single droplet from the ceiling hit the floor and hissed away in a breath of steam. It was worse inside. Marin dropped his duffel and scanned the space. No working lights. The hydro regulators were half-melted, soil trays caked with something like mold, but too dark, too wet. He stepped over a dead irrigation line and crouched beside one of the troughs. When he pressed his fingers into the earth, it clung too tightly, oversaturated and acidic. Nothing short of miracle would take root here. He removed his gloves, tried again, bare-kneed. No miracle. Outside the wind shifted. He heard voices, more laughter. She doesn't even bleed properly, someone said. How's she supposed to breathe? Marin turned slightly through the cracked glass. He saw her again, the girl she was carrying. A flat of seedlings, not looking at anyone, not walking fast enough to avoid them. A tall man stepped into her path. You know the elders already called you barren, don't you? Even your saplings die faster. She froze, tray tight in her hands. Marin felt his jaw clench. His hand hovered near the door latch. One word and he'd be in it. One step and he'd be exiled from exile. But she moved first. Quietly stepped around them, and never meeting his eyes, he let the latch go. That night he set his cot outside the greenhouse. There was no way he was sleeping in that mildew chamber. Stars rolled above like scattered ice. The silence here had weight, not peaceful, not lonely, just intentional. He didn't unpack the heat stone. The next morning someone had been inside, not looting, altering. A single tray near the center had been emptied, then filled with a different soil, darker, looser. The rows were drawn tight, finger-width channels etched with precision. No note, no boot prints. He crouched beside it and touched the top layer, still slightly warm. Not the village's work, her work. He glanced through the cracked panel and saw her near the compost heap, coaxing moisture from a leaf bundle with practiced rhythmic movements. She never looked his way. The air buzzed faintly with static. One of the upper vents sparked, then died with a low whine. That afternoon she came closer, not into the greenhouse, just near it. She set something at the threshold, a cloth wrap bundle, and walked away. Marin waited until she was gone to open it. Inside 6 seeds, black, smooth, unlike any he'd catalogued. They smelled faintly of ozone and pine resin. He looked out across the field. She was gone again, but something in the gesture had shifted the air between them. Later he heard footsteps near the greenhouse too. Villagers muttering, swear if he tries her methods. Artie saw mold regrowing. Elder says it's sabotage, maybe time we burned that place out for good. They didn't see him inside, didn't knock, just walked away into the dusk, voices fading. Marin stood still for a long moment, the cloth bundle in one hand, the seeds in the other. Then he walked to the center Tray she'd prepared and planted 2 exactly where her lines were drawn. If they came to burn it, they'd find something already beginning to grow. He didn't expect them to bloom, but neither did he expect her to care she had, and now so did he. The greenhouse smelled like old earth and quiet defiance. Willie crouched beside the seed tray just after dawn. Frost had kissed the topsoil overnight, leaving behind a fragile crust that cracked beneath his touch. He brushed the surface aside, careful, slow. The seeds were still there. 3 black stones wrapped in folded leaves resting in shallow beds of aerated moss, but the soil had been disturbed, not by wind, not by vermin. Someone had touched them. He stood and scanned the interior. No footprints, no displaced tools, just that unmistakable stillness, like the air itself had been asked to keep a secret. He didn't smile, but he breathed out once, long and low. She'd come back. Outside, the fields whispered, plum stalks shimmered faintly in the early light, their long bulbous leaves shifting with the morning's first breath of wind. The roots ran shallow, here starved of depth and warmth, genetically modified for fast yields, the kind Central favored, but they clung to life with a kind of stubbornness that reminded him of her Aya. He hadn't heard anyone say her full name aloud. They all called her Dry Girl, as if that defined her. He strapped the broken latch tighter, reinforced it with wire from the collapsed shed, then set off toward the water trench where he'd last seen her. The path ran between 2 irrigation spines, both rusted half through. Steam hissed softly from ruptured seams. The moisture that should have fed the field instead pulled uselessly in the dust. He found her kneeling again, same position, same stillness. She worked with short, efficient movements, stripping residue from filter mesh and binding it with frayed plant fibers. Her hair, long and red, was pulled back tight, tied with a twist of braided reed. The same tunic, the same silence. He stopped a few paces behind her and waited. I used the seeds, he said finally. She didn't turn. They're alive, but the soil was touched. Her left hand froze just for a second, then resumed moving. He studied the way she worked. Her hands knew the ground the way a musician knows keys, where to press, when to lift, how not to ask too much at once. I didn't water them, he added. The leaf wrap had enough moisture. A pause. Then her voice, dry as wind and barely audible, don't bury them deep. He tilted his head. Why not? They forget how to reach. That was all. She didn't speak. Again he left without pushing. Further back at the greenhouse, the light slanted lower, slicing between cracked panes and sharp lines. Dust floated through them like seeds that had never landed. He spent the afternoon repairing a pipe that wouldn't seal. His hands worked steadily, but his mind kept circling her words. They forget how to reach. What did that mean exactly? How many times had she tried and been forced to grow anyway? By dusk the soil had shifted again. He saw it immediately. One of the 3 planted seeds now sprouted, the faintest green thread coiled tightly, trembling in the cooling air. It shouldn't have germinated that fast, but it had. He checked the other 2 intact, unchanged. That night he slept inside the greenhouse, not out of necessity but protection. The boys who'd hovered outside before, their laughter hadn't been harmless. Curiosity mixed with cruelty always went sour when ignored. Around midnight, movement outside drew him upright. No sound, just a flicker past the glass. He rose silently, stepped to the door and eased it open. She was there, just beyond the path, half in shadow, arms loose at her sides, not holding anything, not hiding. He didn't speak, neither did she, but then her gaze shifted past him into the greenhouse. You don't need to guard them, she said. Her voice held no accusation, no softness either, just fact. They don't understand what they are. Willie replied. They never tried. She didn't say who she didn't need to. She turned to leave. Wait, he said. She stopped. He walked forward slowly, then set a small folded cloth on the edge of the path between them. Inside, one of the seedling's first leaves pressed gently between 2 squares of insulating mesh. It opened, he said. Isla looked down. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. A soft blink, a shift in breath. It's listening, she said. Then she left. He watched her until the field swallowed her silhouette. The next day the boys came back. This time they didn't speak. They walked the edge of the crop, stopped near the compost bin, and threw a rock at the greenhouse door. It struck with a sharp clang, bounced once, and rolled into the dust. Willie stepped outside before they could try again. He didn't shout, he just looked at them. The taller one hesitated, just passing by. He muttered. They walked off, but their silence was a promise. He reinforced the hinges that night took apart a broken seed tray and fashioned a crude lock, not foolproof but better than nothing. When he finally sat down to eat boiled root chips and protein paste, he realized it was the first proper meal he'd had in 2 days. The work had consumed his attention. The thought made him glance at the sprout again, still standing, still reaching. Aya returned the next evening, not with seeds, not with words. She stood near the door and waited until he opened it. Then without a word she stepped inside. She moved like someone crossing sacred ground, slow, cautious, not touching Anything. She stopped beside the growing tray and looked down at the sprout. Her hand hovered above it, then she spoke. Not to him but to the plant. Still breathing, she murmured. He didn't interrupt. She turned to leave. Why do they call you dry? He asked. Her shoulders stiffened. The light caught the red in her hair like fire underwater. They said I couldn't bloom. And did you believe them? She didn't answer, but her eyes lingered on the sprout as she stepped outside. This time when she left, she pulled the door closed behind her. He took that as trust, a seed in its own right, something small, something living, something about to grow. The morning air was cold enough to sting. Willie crouched near the greenhouse threshold, his breath fogging in shallow bursts as he checked the sprout's stem for signs of stress. It stood firm, one translucent green shoot arcing just above the soil. New life coaxed from a seed no one believed could bloom. Behind him, the rest of the greenhouse remained still, quiet, guarded. It had become more than shelter. It was a line in the dirt drawn between decay and something unspoken but alive. He heard footsteps before he saw her. Aya didn't announce herself, she never did, but he could tell it was her by the lightness of the steps and the way the field seemed to quiet around her presence. She stopped a few feet away. He didn't look up right away. He wanted her to choose the moment. Eventually she spoke. You stayed. Willie glanced at her, then her eyes weren't on him, they were on the tray, on the sprout pushing its way into the chill light. So did it, he said softly. She stepped forward close enough to share breath. She didn't speak again, but she didn't turn away either. That was enough for now. They worked in tandem for the rest of the morning. She sifted compost through woven mesh, separating viable mulch from rot. He scraped mineral buildup from the intake valves and sealed two leaking joints. No words passed between them, just the hum of movement and the hiss of the greenhouse settling into its rhythm. At noon, Willie heated a flat stone on the small cooker and laid out sliced root vegetables. It wasn't much, but it was warm. He offered her one silently. She hesitated just a flicker, but took it. She ate slowly, chewing with careful patience. At one point her hand trembled, not from hunger, from memory. He didn't ask. Instead, he offered another slice. This time her fingers brushed his. She flinched at the contact, a small involuntary jerk, then looked down at her hand like she touched something she wasn't supposed to. I'm not allowed, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Allowed what? Willie asked gently. Her mouth opened, closed, then she said it like peeling bark off a raw wound, to be touched. He held her gaze steady and quiet. I'm not touching you, he said, just sharing food. She nodded, but her jaw was tight and her shoulders curled slightly inward. The meal passed in silence. After that, by afternoon, the clouds began to thicken, pressing low over the colony's edge. The village's central kiln released its daily blast of heat, a sharp exhale of ash that darkened the sky over the fields. Willie saw shadows gather along the southern rows, villagers moving with the deliberate slowness of people pretending not to be watching. Two men lingered longer than the others, eyes fixed on the greenhouse. Willie closed the door, not abruptly, just firmly enough to make a point. Isla noticed. They don't like it, she said, her voice unreadable. They don't have to, Willie replied. They think I'm dangerous. He raised an eyebrow. You, she gestured toward the tray. Things grow around me that shouldn't. Maybe they should. A pause, then quieter. They think you're too close. I'm not here to please them. Her expression changed barely. The muscles around her mouth softened and her eyes dropped. For a second, they might come tonight. Willie's tone didn't shift. Let them. That night he locked the door. He didn't sleep. Instead, he sat near the seed tray, a heating stone warming his knees, his thoughts steady and alert. Just after midnight he heard movement, not footsteps, breathing, a presence just outside the greenhouse wall, then a voice. Low, mocking. Got your mold lover sleeping in there? Willie didn't move a second. Voice joined. Heard. She cursed. The yield down at third plot. Elders are talking. Willie stood slowly and crossed to the door. He didn't open it, but he didn't stay silent. Say it louder, he said. See who else hears you. Silence, then retreating steps. When dawn came, the greenhouse was untouched, but someone had left a pile of scorched leaves near the entrance, subtle but clear, a warning or a threat. Ella returned just after sunrise. She didn't look at the burnt leaves. She didn't comment on the smell of char. Instead, she walked to the tray, knelt beside the sprout and rested her hand just above the soil. Then softly she said, "They're afraid of what I might become." Willie looked at her, then at the fragile green curl emerging from the ground. "No," he said, "they're afraid because they already know." She turned to him, and for the first time didn't look away. Her eyes shimmered with something unspoken, hope maybe, or the fragile beginnings of it. She stayed with him the rest of the day. They worked in silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because they didn't need to fill the space anymore. When she left that evening, she touched the doorframe lightly with her fingers, an old gesture, maybe cultural, maybe instinctual, and Willie, watching her disappear into the field, realized something had changed. Not her, not yet, but him. He had come to this colony to disappear now. For the first time he wanted to be seen. The storm came. Before the warning bell sounded, it wasn't lightning or wind that announced it, just the smell, a sudden shift in the air, sharp and bitter like scorched minerals and wet metal. Willie caught it as he was clearing algae from the irrigation tubes, the scent pulling his head up mid-motion. A second later the greenhouse creaked under pressure, then groaned as if something vast had just exhaled overhead. He looked up through the fractured glass ceiling. The sky was no longer gray, it had turned a dense chemical yellow, the kind that didn't belong to any natural weather pattern. Colony storms weren't meteorological, they were system failures, atmospheric control faltering under pressure, dumping half-treated water vapor and static discharge across kilometers. The village kiln, if overfired, could trigger a chain reaction in the artificial climate system. This wasn't just bad luck, this was negligence, and it was coming fast. Willie dropped the tools and started sealing the greenhouse as makeshift hatches. They weren't designed for containment, but he layered tarp over the worst cracks, twisted wire through every latch, and used compost bins as dead weight to brace the inner door. He'd just secured the main seam when he heard her, a cough, sharp, dry from outside. He turned. Heart-lurching. Aya stood just beyond the greenhouse. Her clothes were soaked, skin streaked with dust and acid smudged water. She held one arm close to her body. Hurt maybe, but her eyes were focused on him. She hadn't come for shelter, she hadn't expected it. She'd come to check the sprout. Get in, he said, stepping toward the door. She didn't move. I said get inside. Still she hesitated. Then another cough racked her, worse this time. She staggered slightly. That broke him. Willie crossed the threshold, grabbed her gently by the arm and pulled her in. Her skin was cold, wet cloth clinging to her back, her hair heavy with chemical rain. She stumbled, but he caught her before she hit the floor. She didn't resist. He pulled the door shut behind them and bolted it with a rusted iron rod. The storm roared outside now, rattling the glass with thick, uneven pulses. The air inside the greenhouse smelled like wet soil and stress. He guided her to a cot he kept folded behind the seed trays and helped her sit. Only then did he see the wound just above her elbow, shallow but raw, torn through fabric and flesh by something sharp, a broken panel. Maybe it was bleeding, but not badly. I'm going to clean it, he said. She flinched at his voice. It'll sting. She didn't answer. She looked away. Willie opened his medkit, pulled out a strip of cloth, a packet of coagulant, and a thermal pad. He worked efficiently with the practiced calm of someone who'd done field work in places where help was always far away. As he dabbed at the cut, her breath hitched. He stopped. Too much. No, she whispered. He glanced up. Her eyes were locked on the far wall, not crying, just holding still in that way that said she was trying not to fall apart. He finished wrapping her arm, then offered her a heat pack. She didn't take it. He placed it on her lap and sat a few feet away, giving her space. The silence stretched. The storm outside deepened like gravel being poured across the roof, then scraped back by wind. The crops would suffer for this, maybe even die, but in here it was warm still. She broke the silence. First I was 6. The first time they told me I had no value. Willie didn't respond. He let the words settle. They measured my genetic viability, reproductive index, and metabolic ratios too low. They said 0 reproductive value. That's what they put in the ledger. Willie looked at her, but she still stared at the wall. They stopped assigning me group tasks, said I'd distract the others. The other girls were allowed to braid their hair with gold grass. I wasn't. It wasn't worth the dye. He didn't offer comfort, just listened. I used to sing to the soil, she said, voice thinner now. They thought it was madness, but the plants listened. Not all of them, not always, but sometimes the soil remembers softness. She finally looked at him. I forgot how that felt until you. Willie blinked. The air inside the greenhouse felt suddenly smaller. I'm not here to fix you, he said carefully. I came here broken, I know, but I'll protect what grows, he added, his voice firmer. Even if it starts in silence. She nodded. Then slowly she reached out. Her fingers hovered above his for a breath, unsure, shaking, then rested there, a fragile contact, nothing more. But he didn't move, and when her hand trembled he gently covered it with his own. That night the storm peeled at the roof, tore at the frame inside. They sat side by side on the cot, hands touching, sharing warmth in a space meant only for decay. But something was growing here now, and neither of them wanted to leave. The greenhouse had never felt this still. The air inside held its breath, thick with the scent of root, sap, moss, and something older, something settling outside. Wind moved across the distant plum fields, but in here it was warm, heavy, almost sacred. The sprout in the center tray had opened its second leaf, broad and full, catching condensation as it dripped from the patched roof above. Willie watched the bead of moisture collect, tremble, then fall, absorbed instantly into the living Green, he looked up. Aya stood near the irrigation valve, her fingers trailing along the pipe like she was listening. Through her skin she didn't speak, she rarely did unless it mattered. Her hair was tied back with reed string, her tunic stained from hours spent bent over soil. And her eyes held the quiet calculation of someone who'd grown used to surviving unnoticed, but now she was being noticed. Willie returned to clearing sediment from the compost hatch, but his attention never strayed far from her. Since the storm she'd returned every day, not as a visitor, as something closer. She'd started tending her own row, leaving small markers in the soil, 3 pebbles lined to the left, a slice of dried leaf embedded at the end of each trench. She didn't explain the meaning, she didn't have to. The plants responded. And so did he. They worked until mid-afternoon without saying a word, just the quiet clatter of tools and the rush of water filtering through recycled piping. It was a rhythm, and it held. At some point she stood beside him with a bowl of steamed root slices. She'd prepared them using heat, stone and salt water from the filter unit. When he took the bowl from her hands, her fingers brushed his. She didn't flinch. He looked up. Neither of them smiled, but something shifted later. While inspecting the seed trays, she crouched beside the circular vine they'd replanted 2 days ago. The plant had begun winding again, tendrils curling back on themselves. It's choking itself, she murmured, still afraid of space. Willie replied. She nodded, or still remembering where it's been. He moved to her side and gently unwound a few coils, pressing the tendrils outward into fresh moss. She watched his hands closely, then touched the root base herself. Her fingers moved beside his, deliberate, calm. They stayed like that, kneeling in the dirt, hands brushing occasionally, not speaking. Eventually she broke the silence. I wanted to teach soil, she said, before they labeled me. He paused. You still do. I lost the right. My body was declared non-viable, unfit for instruction, for reproduction, for partnership. You didn't lose anything, he said. They took it. She studied him. Why are you still here? Because I finally found something worth planting. Isla didn't move at first, then slowly, carefully she stood. I won't be touched unless I choose it, she said. You don't owe me anything, he answered. I know. She stepped toward him close. He stood as well, their faces inches apart. Her breathing had quickened, but not from fear. Her gaze didn't waver. If I ask you, she said, would you treat me like I'm not broken? He reached out, fingertips brushing her jaw, not claiming, not demanding, only if you ask. I'm asking. That night the greenhouse turned into something more than a refuge. They lay on a pallet made from bundled cloth and layered moss, the glow of the bioluminescent leaves casting soft green light across the curved glass walls. Outside the wind hummed across the irrigation grid, the world unchanged, but inside here something rare unfolded. Aya moved first, slowly, intentionally. Her hand rested on Willie's chest, tentative. At first, like she was waiting for resistance, but none came. He remained still, his breath steady beneath her palm, warmth radiating upward into her fingers. She leaned in, brushing her lips against his shoulder. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. It was something older, something more primal, recognition. Her breath hitched, caught halfway between fear and hunger. Then steadied, she lifted her head to meet his eyes. He saw the questions there, the tension, the doubt, but also the flicker of something bolder, desire, permission, wonder. He didn't reach for her, he didn't have to. She climbed into his lap, slow and deliberate, her knees straddling either side of his legs. The movement wasn't rushed or rehearsed. It was full of curiosity, the kind that's only possible when there's trust underneath it. Willie inhaled sharply, not from surprise but from the quiet intensity of her weight settling onto him. Her hands pressed against his shoulders, then slid up to cup his face, thumbs grazing the line of his cheekbones. Her fingers weren't practiced. They were exploring. She was learning him by touch. You're not afraid, she whispered. I've been waiting, he said. Voice low, hushed like soil being turned at dawn. She tilted her head, her red hair falling in a curtain between them. So have I. Their lips met, not desperate, not frantic, but deep. She kissed like someone tasting something she never thought she'd be allowed, like she was claiming space no one had ever offered her before. And Willie let her. He kissed her back with quiet reverence, hands remaining at her waist, resisting the urge to pull her closer until she asked for it. When she did, when her hips shifted slightly, her breath catching again, he answered with a firm grounding touch, guiding without taking. Aya gasped into his mouth, a soft sound, vulnerable. Then she pressed closer, her body fitting against his like it had been waiting for this moment without ever daring to hope for it. Her tunic slipped from one shoulder, his fingertips traced the curve of her collarbone, pausing when she trembled, not from fear but from sensation, new, overwhelming. Real is this, she began, voice unsteady. Is this supposed to feel like this? He searched her face, making sure, always making sure. Only if it does. She laughed softly, a raw, almost startled sound. I feel everything. Good, he murmured. Don't stop. She didn't. She leaned forward, her forehead resting briefly against his, grounding herself before she reached between them, guiding him where her body had only ever been. Told it would be barren, she moved with care, slow, adjusting breath shallow as her hips sank down inch by inch until he was inside her, and then she froze not in pain. In awe her fingers tightened on his shoulders and she let out a sound he'd never heard before, a low astonished moan, deep and quiet and filled with something she had no words for yet. Willie's hands gripped her hips, gently anchoring her, giving her time. "You're okay," he whispered. "I'm more than okay." She started to move, cautious at first, feeling every inch, exploring the rhythm like a dance she was inventing for the first time. Her eyes fluttered closed as sensation built, and when she found the pace that matched her breath, she stayed there, riding him with a grace that was unrefined but entirely hers. She made sounds she didn't try to hide, small breathy gasps that deepened into soft moans, and when she leaned forward, bracing her hands on either side of his head, she let her forehead rest against his as she lost herself in the sensation of being filled, being held, being seen. Her voice came in a whisper, shaky and disbelieving. "I didn't know I could feel like this." Willie kissed her jaw, her neck, the hollow between her collarbones. "You were never the problem," he murmured. She gasped, her hips moving faster now, driven by a need of them could name, yet she rode him with abandon, with wonder, with the kind of desperate joy that only someone who thought they'd never be wanted could feel. And when release came, it came like spring breaking through ice, sudden, unstoppable, raw. She cried out, voice cracking with pleasure in something deeper. Release, arrival, rebirth. He followed her seconds later, holding her tightly, not to possess but to share in it. Afterward she collapsed against his chest, skin damp, breath uneven. Neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of what they'd done, of what it meant, of what it had changed. When she finally spoke, it was a whisper pressed into his collarbone. "You were the first." He tightened his arms around her. "I'll be the last." She smiled, soft, tired, real, and for the first time in her life she fell asleep in someone's arms without fear. The change didn't come all at once. It began as a whisper in her body, just a flicker, like a breath caught in the hollow beneath her ribs. Isla had spent her life studying the soil, learning how to sense when something was shifting, even if it hadn't yet broken the surface. This felt the same, a warmth where there had only ever been cold, a fullness she had no memory of carrying. 3 mornings had passed since the night they had shared, since she'd guided him into the space no one had ever been allowed to enter, not even in dreams. And now something lived inside her, not metaphor, not symbol, life. She stood barefoot in the greenhouse, moss soft beneath her feet, her hand resting over the curve of her belly. The sky beyond the glass was streaked with silver light, the early sun filtered through mist. Willie hadn't woken yet. He lay curled under the thermal blanket in the corner where the roots hung low. His breathing was steady, his presence anchoring. Aya took one slow breath, then another. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. She didn't know what to call this fluttering sensation beneath her navel. It wasn't movement, not yet, but it was presence, a pressure, a warmth. She sank down onto her knees beside the tray where they had planted the first sprout together. It had bloomed 2 days ago, unexpected, bold, its violet petals soft as breath. She'd watched it open slowly, like it had been waiting for her. So had this. She closed her eyes, pressed both hands flat against her abdomen. It was absurd, biologically dismissed, declared impossible by her people before she was old enough to speak. Her reproductive markers had been labeled null, medical documentation had been sealed with the phrase 0 reproductive value. So why then did her body feel like this? Why did the thought of it make her tremble, not from fear but something close to awe? A sudden motion behind her, then the soft thud of bare feet on stone. She turned. Willie stood in the doorway of the sleeping alcove, rubbing his eyes, blinking into the morning light. He looked rumpled, peaceful, and then his expression changed. He saw her, the way she knelt, the way her hands gripped her belly like they were holding back the world. He was at her side in 3 steps. "What's wrong?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her throat was tight. I don't know how to say this." Willie waited. He never rushed her. She looked at him, really looked, and then reached for his hand. She pressed it against her stomach, not hard, just enough to share what she was feeling. "It's there," she whispered. He didn't move, not for a long moment, then slowly he looked up at her. "Are you saying?" Her breath shuddered out of her. "I think I'm pregnant." Willie's eyes widened, but not in panic, not in disbelief, just wonder. He pressed his hand flatter against her belly, fingers spread like he was holding something sacred. "But they said." "I know what they said," she whispered, "but they were wrong." She was shaking now, not from cold, from something too big to name. "This isn't supposed to happen," she said, voice cracking. "They'll think it's a mutation, an accident, a mistake." "It's none of those things." Her hands trembled in her lap. "What if they try to take it?" He took her face in both hands, gently tilting her gaze to his. "Then they'll have to go through me." Her lower lip quivered. She closed her eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted. So am I, he said, but not of you, never of you, she exhaled, and in that breath was a surrender not to fear but to truth, to possibility. Willie pulled her into his arms and she let herself be held for a long time. They just sat there on the floor, knees against moss, breath sinking, hands tangled. I didn't think this was possible, she whispered into his chest. Neither did I. And yet here you are. Later that morning the greenhouse became a flurry of movement. Willie reinforced the shade covers, checked the heating vents, and adjusted the nutrient lines. Isla moved slower than usual, her mind elsewhere, hands trailing across seedlings like she was listening for the heartbeat of something invisible. The rumors started that afternoon. It was a boy from the outer fields who saw them first. Willie brushing soil from Aya's knees, Aya holding his hand a beat too long, both of them smiling. He ran back to the village whispering the same words that would spread in hours. She's carrying something I saw by dusk. 3 elders had called a quiet meeting. No one spoke to them directly, not yet, but eyes followed her through every path she walked, some full of confusion, others full of something colder. Willie noticed at the shift, so did Aya. That night she stood barefoot outside the greenhouse, hands cradling her lower belly, eyes on the sky. I dreamed once, she said as he joined her, that I'd plant something in this world that would last longer than me. Willie stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder. You have. I thought I was empty, she whispered. You were never empty, he said. You were just waiting for something worth growing. She turned to him, her eyes shimmered. You still want to stay? He reached out and laced their fingers together. I'm not just staying, he said, I'm building something with you. And that night, as they lay curled together beneath the thin roof of leaf and light, Aya didn't dream of exile or shame or silence. She dreamed of a girl with her eyes and his smile, running barefoot through wild vines, and for the first time in her life she woke with no fear of what came next, only hope. The sky split open just before dawn, not with